In this program, we're going to calculate pay for people by taking how many hours they work times their hourly pay rate to get the gross pay. However, we'll also consider overtime. That's time and a half. And you'll see that I have these constants here. Base hours is 40, overtime multiplier, time and a half is 1.5. Those are never going to change in this program. If they ever would change later, it's easy to change them up there. One of the variables is hours worked. That's all the hours worked, whether they're regular or overtime hours. That's what goes in one of those text boxes. Hourly pay rate is in another text box. Base pay will not include overtime pay. That's for 40 hours or less. Overtime hours is how many hours beyond the base hours they work. So if they work 43 hours, there's 3 overtime hours. Overtime pay is how much pay for overtime, and gross pay is the total pay overall. We're going to use double.TryParse instead of try catch. So double.TryParse inside this if. Got to be inside an if. So we're going to put two what we call arguments inside the parentheses. The first one, I'll use txt hours work dot text. That is a string. Comma out. Don't forget the word out. That's very important. And the variable we want to put the value in if it works. So hours worked is the variable that if we can successfully parse a double out of txt hours work dot text, that's where we want it to go. If that doesn't work, if that returns false, it's going to go to this else. So either it will work and this will return true and go to the main part of the if, and it will put the value into hours worked. Or it doesn't work out and then we're going to go to this else. So instead of this catch, we have an else because it's if else. We've got some bad data here, so I'm going to put a message in a message box for the users. And I know what the problem is. It came from that hours worked text box. So I'm giving them a message about hours worked so they know that's where the error is. That can be an advantage of using Try Parse. You might know exactly where the error is. Since I know what text box that happened in, I'm going to put the focus in that text box, txt hours worked, and I'll even clear out the text for them. That's kind of optional, but I know they have bad data in there, so I'm going to clear it out and give them another chance right now to fix it. So let's see how this works. If I type in just some letters and click calculate gross pay, there is that message box. It went to the else. If I type in 20, nothing happens because that's an okay numeric value. Remember that double.TryParse will return true or false, but if it returns true, it will take what was in txt hours worked.text and take that numeric value and put it into the variable hours worked. We've got to do the same thing with another text box, txt pay rate. So we'll do if double.TryParse, put in txt pay rate.text, comma out, don't forget that keyword out, hourly pay rate, because that's the variable we want to have it go into if it works out, if it returns true that that does work. If it's false, if that doesn't work, we're going to drop down into this else. And we'll know that it was a problem with the pay rate because it's that very text box that gave us the issue trying to get the text out of there parsed into a double. So I can copy and paste a lot of this here and just make some changes to reflect the different text box. So that's what I'll do. And I know it's about pay rate now, so I'll change this from being about hours worked to pay rate. And then I'll adjust the text boxes to reflect the txt pay rate text box. Because I know that's where the problem was. I'll try it out. I'll put some good data in the first text box, but some bad in the second. Click Calculate Gross Pay. There's that error message I created. Put the focus where the issue is. So we're all set. And then again, there is an int.TryParse if you need it. Well, the only way we got in this far here is if all the data is okay. All the data are okay, I guess I should say. So it made it through the first double.TryParse. That was true. It made it here. It's true. So now we are safe to do some math. Did this person work overtime? Well, if they worked over 40 hours, they did, but we're calling that base hours. So if hours worked is greater than the constant base hours, just in case somewhere along the way, maybe there'll be a company or maybe the law might change and base hours are no longer 40. Maybe they'd be 35, maybe they'll be 45. So if that's true, if the hours worked are greater than base hours, which in this case is greater than 40, they did work overtime. Else, they didn't work overtime. So those are these two sections we have here, figuring out if the person worked overtime or not. Our math calculations are pretty simple if they didn't work overtime. So let's start there. The gross pay is simply going to be how many hours they worked times the hourly rate. So gross pay equals hours worked, which we were able to successfully parse out of the text of that text box, and hourly pay rate, which we also successfully parsed. We're going to stick that gross pay into LBL grosspay.text, and I'll format the string as currency when we use .toString. And we can now check this out if they didn't work overtime. So I'll try a value of 40 or less. I'll go with 30 for hours and $10 an hour. That's $300. If I try something greater than 40, like 50 hours at $20 an hour, we don't see anything because we haven't taken care of that part of the if, that where they did work overtime. Here's where we have some work to do. One thing we have to do is calculate overtime hours. So if you worked 43 hours, 43 minus 40 is 3 overtime hours. So it's hours worked minus base hours. Again, the base hours is 40, but we're ready if any time in the future that ever changes to a different value. So now we know how many overtime hours they worked. Again, the total hours they worked minus the base hours. Their base pay is going to be the base hours, which is 40 times their hourly pay rate. Guaranteed if they worked overtime, the first 40 hours of their pay is going to be times their regular hourly pay rate. Their overtime pay is going to be a little bit better. So their overtime pay is their overtime hours times their hourly pay rate times our multiplier that we have set up for overtime, which right now is 1.5 in this program, time and a half. They only get that time and a half pay for overtime pay, not for their base pay, and only for the overtime hours. So now the gross pay is the base pay plus the overtime pay. That covers both sections of all their work for that week. And we can display that in the label just as we did in the other one, LBL grosspay.text equals grosspay.toString, and we'll format it as currency with a C in quotation marks. So now we can test this out. We'll say this person worked 50 hours this week at $20 an hour. And the gross pay is $1,100. 40 hours at $20 an hour, that's $800. And then 10 more hours at times 20 times 1.5. So it's 10 hours times 30 because it's time and a half. 20 times 1.5 is 30. Let's check out some other things that I did here that were already set up for you. On the reset, you see where also put the focus in the top text box. So I'll run this so you can clearly see that. Gross pay. Remember, gross pay means it's your pay before taxes and things like that. And you see that the focus did go to the top text box. I've got some text change events for both text boxes. So if they change data once they've already calculated the gross pay, the answer is going to disappear. They'll have to re-click calculate gross pay. So here's our answer of 1,100. If I change anything in the first text box, the gross pay goes away. And they'll have to re-click on calculate gross pay to get a fresh answer. If I do anything in the other text box, the result goes away. That way, they've got to click on calculate gross pay to get the answer they need. Although technically, I've also assigned that as the accept button. So if I click there on form 1, you can see that the accept button is BTN calculate. Hard for you to see this, and I'm going to hit enter on the keyboard, but I'll type in these two numbers and press enter, and then the gross pay shows up. Again, gross pay is before Social Security, state tax, federal tax, health insurance, all that stuff comes out. That's what gross pay is. Net pay is what you actually have after all of that stuff. So again, I use those const for constants. Those things were not going to change throughout the program. And double.TryParse, inside this if, it's going to return true or false, and then it will put that value in the variable if it works. And an advantage of the try parse here is that I knew exactly what text boxes were causing the problem, and that allowed me to make some really clear error messages.